Okay, so here we go on the second section, or actually third section, but the second section we're covering in chapter 4, which is on the lives of stars. And so this basically will take us through from when a star is born to when a star dies. So what you need for a star basically is gas and dust. Okay, so we first call a big group of gas and dust that's all kind of hanging out together, we call it a nebula. So a nebula is a bunch of stuff hanging out together, and once those things start to get more dense and hot, and nuclear fusion starts. So this means that atoms that are in that area of gas start to kind of fuse with each other. They start to bump into each other hard enough that they basically become a new element, and we call that nuclear fusion. And so once we have that start happening, that nebula can go from being a nebula to becoming an actual star. And so we'll talk a little bit about kind of the steps for that. But first, let's just start off at the top. So over here, we've got new stars forming. So we've got these gas and dust is kind of what you're seeing here, especially here. This is a nebula right here. This is a nebula. And as those things start to come together, you can start to see a little bit of brighter light in the center there as those things are kind of starting to fuse together and create that star. So lots of things going on all the time. So as stars are developing, they have to start with a cloud of gas and dust hanging out together. And how long a star lives depends on how much mass it has. So how much gas and dust come together and start fusing together tells us how much mass it's going to have. And once it gets a large mass, that's going to be how long that star will live. One thing I did not mention before is that first stage of a star is what we call a protostar. And so once a star is formed, we call it a protostar. So, and then, like I said before, the amount of gas and dust that it has tells you about how much mass it will have and then how long it will live. Once the star starts to run out of that fuel, that gas, that stuff that's happening on the inside, causing it to kind of come together, push together with nuclear fusion, it becomes a white dwarf, a neutron star, or a black hole. So those are the three different things that can happen as a star dies. So 3 different ways. A white dwarf, a neutron star, a black hole. Okay. As a medium-sized star runs out of fuel, some of the gas drifts out into space. So as it's kind of losing its fuel, that gas goes away. It doesn't stay by anymore. So it starts to go out into space a little bit further. It becomes a planetary nebula, and the core left behind is what we call a white dwarf. Okay, so its gas is losing its gas. It's not really keeping a core hold on it anymore like it did to begin with. And so it's no longer part of the star. So it kind of drifts off into space, and what's left behind is what we call white dwarf. So white dwarf is just a teeny tiny little star that's taking place there. And this planetary nebula is basically kind of just the gas and dust that's left behind, are kind of taken off of the star and traveling away. Once white dwarfs stop glowing, they're called a black dwarf. So once they kind of run out of whatever gas and dust is left behind that's keeping it glowing, then it becomes what we call a black dwarf, and it's no longer a star anymore. This is a picture from your book that was pretty interesting, and it kind of goes through every different type of star and how it goes through things, and I'll kind of go through this with you. I was unable really to completely get the nebula on the picture, but a nebula is where things start. Remember we talked about the nebula is that big cloud of gas and dust that causes a star to form. So either we get a low mass or medium mass protostar out of that, which is that beginning part of the star, or we get a high mass, depending on how much gas and dust it has. So from there, we either get a low mass or medium mass star, or a high mass star. Okay, so those are kind of what develops out of that first protostar. So look at here, we still have a lot of gas and dust that are kind of swirling around still. From the low mass star, as it starts to kind of blow up at the end, or starts to kind of go away, first it expands into what we call a red giant. And this red giant then becomes that planetary nebula I mentioned, with just a little glowing part in the back, or in the middle there, which is a white dwarf, and then becomes a black dwarf. So that's how we are going to go out as our sun, which is a medium mass star. We'll eventually become a red giant, which will turn into a planetary nebula with just this little thing in the middle that's still glowing, a white dwarf, then a black dwarf. Okay. If you're a high mass star, you'll begin with a supergiant. So as you start to kind of lose your stuff at the end, you become a supergiant. The supergiant will turn into what we call an explosion of a supernova. So it's kind of like a one-time explosion. What happens is like all of this stuff is happening and it's starting to expand, and eventually it's just like there's too much pressure and too much gas and dust in the area. So it explodes in what we call a supernova, leaving behind either a neutron star, or if it has strong enough gravity, it will become a black hole. And we'll go over what a black hole is in just a second. But those are the two different paths it can take. All the smaller ones, this is what it does. It goes along the top here. The larger ones, they go through this at the bottom. And then at the end, you have a neutron star or a black hole. Okay, so this is kind of the end here, the death of a different type of star. This is those big ones. So if we have a really big star, we have what a supergiant. They run out of fuel and explode, like I mentioned on the last slide. So supergiants run out of fuel, they explode into what we call supernova. Some of the supernova leftovers can become part of a nebula and become a neutron star. So it could just become something really, really tiny star, but it can go back into becoming a star if there's enough gas and dust left behind. But the most massive stars have all become black holes, because what happens is their gravitational pull is so strong that it pulls everything inside of it, basically. It pulls all the matter into a black hole, and then the only way we know black holes are there is the fact that there's this huge gravitational pull around them. So there's not anything around the black holes, because anything that comes around them is going to be pulled in because of the gravitational force that's there. So basically all matter of that star gets sucked inward into a black hole, and you can't see it anymore. So that's like the end of a death of a really, really, really big star that has a ton of gravitational pull left. All right, so that's the end of the section on the death of stars. And so lovely homework on this. And there is some reading from the book that you can do if you'd like to for your homework. And again, you can either print out the homework, you can just answer on a separate sheet of paper, you can pick it up at school when there's pickup date. But those are your options for doing the homework. And then you can either take a picture for me, not of me, but for me, send it to me, or you can hand it back in a hand-in date. Enjoy!